Welcome back. When we talk about World War II, we usually get distracted by the Titans. We talk about the Tiger tanks, the B-17 flying fortresses, the battleships, and the artillery that could level a city block. But today, I want to zoom in, way in. I want to talk about the last line of defense, the piece of steel on a soldier's hip that he prays he never has to use. But if he does, he wants it to hit like a freight train. Today we are hunting for the title of the most powerful handgun of World War II. Now, before the keyboard warriors start typing, we have to define power. Are we talking about the size of the hole, or are we talking about raw kinetic energy, the physics that actually breaks things? Because depending on who you ask, the answer changes completely. If you ask your grandfather, or watch any American movie made in the 1980s, the answer is simple. It's the Colt 1911, the .45 ACP. The legend says if you hit a man in the thumb with a .45, he'll spin around 3 times and explode. Spoiler alert, that's not how physics works. But the .45 was a beast. However, was it the most powerful? What if I told you there was a handgun carried by one of the most famous generals of the war that hit nearly twice as hard as the standard issue Colt? We are going to look at the legends, the myths, and the mathematical reality of World War II stopping power. Let's start with the heavyweight champion of the world, the pride of America, the creation of the prophet himself, John Moses Browning, the M1911A1. You simply cannot talk about World War II power without this gun. By 1941, this old warhorse had already served in World War I, chased Pancho Villa through Mexico, and served in the Banana Wars. It fires the .45 ACP round. That stands for automatic cold pistol, but let's be honest, in America, it stands for freedom. Here is the main argument for the 1911's dominance. It is not about speed. The .45 ACP is actually incredibly slow. It travels at about 830 to 850 feet per second. That's subsonic. On a sunny day, if the light is right, you could almost watch the bullet fly down range. But it is heavy. That bullet weighs 230 grains. Compare that to a modern 9mm, which is usually 115 grains. The .45 isn't a needle. It's a flying ashtray. When it hits, it transfers momentum efficiently. It doesn't just poke a hole, it punches a hole. The philosophy here is stopping power via tissue destruction. The U.S. Army learned this lesson the hard way in the Philippines against the Moro warriors. Small, fast bullets didn't stop them. Big, heavy bullets did. So for the average GI, the 1911 was the ultimate confidence booster. It felt substantial in the hand. The recoil was a heavy, reassuring push rather than a snap, and it put targets down. But remember, we are looking for the most powerful, based on physics. And this is where the 1911 starts to look, well, average.
Let's look at the competition. Did the Axis powers or the Soviets have anything that could dethrone the American heavy hitter? The Germans loved the 9mm Parabellum, the Luger P08, the Walther P38. These are elegant weapons, high velocity, flat shooting, very accurate. But in terms of raw knockdown energy, the 9mm pushes about 340 to 350 foot-pounds of energy. It's snappy, but it's not a cannon. It relies on penetration, not raw impact. Then you have the Russians with the Tokarev TT-33. This thing fired the 7.62 by 25mm cartridge. It was an absolute screamer. It flew at 1,400 feet per second. It could penetrate thick winter coats and even early ballistic helmets that would bounce a .45 right off. But penetration isn't the same as power. The Tokarev bullet was tiny. It would zip right through a target without dumping its energy inside. It was an ice pick, not a sledgehammer. The enemy might die eventually, but they wouldn't sit down immediately. So, looking at the numbers, the 1911 is still winning the standard issue contest. It has the diameter and the mass. It generates roughly 370 to 400 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. But the war wasn't just fought with standard issue gear. Officers were allowed to bring personal weapons, and one American general brought a gun that makes the 1911 look like a toy. Enter the Smith & Wesson registered Magnum, later known as the Model 27. You know General George S. Patton, old blood and guts? He famously hated the Colt 1911. He called semi-automatics unreliable. Patton carried an ivory-handled revolver on his hip, and it wasn't just for show. That gun was chambered in a brand-new cartridge invented in the mid-1930s, the .357 Magnum. The .357 Magnum was designed to do one thing: punch through car doors and engine blocks for the FBI during the gangster era.
It was designed to stop cars, not just people. Let's look at the math. Remember the .45 ACP? It hit with about 370 foot-pounds of energy. The .357 Magnum, fired from a standard barrel, hits with 550 to 600 foot-pounds of energy. That is a 50% increase in raw power. In 1944, this was a handheld lightning bolt. It was the Desert Eagle of its day. If Patton had to draw that revolver, and there are stories that he actually shot at a German Heinkel bomber with it, he was unleashing the highest velocity, highest energy handgun round available in the European theater. It traveled at over 1,400 feet per second, same as the Russian Tokarev. But here is the difference. It was a heavy bullet. It combined the speed of a rifle with the weight of a pistol bullet. When that hits, it creates massive hydrostatic shock. It forces fluid away from the impact point faster than the tissue can stretch, causing massive trauma. The gun itself was a work of art. The Smith & Wesson registered Magnum was built on the large N frame. It was heavy steel, blued to a deep shine. It had a shrouded ejector rod and adjustable sights. It was a precision instrument built to contain an explosion. So, technically speaking, the title of most powerful handgun of World War II goes to the Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum. No contest. But there is a catch. If it was so good, why didn't every soldier carry one? Why did we stick with the slower 1911? Two reasons: recoil and logistics. Shooting a .357 Magnum hurts. It's loud, there is a massive muzzle flash that blinds you at night, and follow-up shots are slow. In a muddy trench in Bastogne, you don't need to blow a hole through an engine block. You need to put 3 rounds on target fast before the other guy gets you. The 1911, despite being weaker on paper, was controllable. The recoil of a .45 is a heavy push, not a violent snap. Plus, the 1911 reloads in 2 seconds. It dropped the mag, slap a new one in, and drop the slide. Patton's revolver took much longer. You have to swing the cylinder out, hit the ejector rod to dump the empties, and load 6 rounds one by one, unless you had a speed loader, which wasn't standard kit back then. In war, good enough usually beats the most powerful. The 1911 was good enough to win 2 world wars. The .357 was a luxury item for generals who wanted to show off. So, who wins the belt? If we are talking about cultural power, the winner is the Colt 1911. It is the soul of the American military. It did the heavy lifting. It was reliable, easy to fix, and hit hard enough. But if we are strictly talking about physics, who brought the biggest boom to the party? The crown goes to General Patton and his Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum. It was the only handgun on the battlefield that could genuinely be called a Magnum. Which one would you choose if you were storming the beaches? The capacity and speed of the semi-auto or the raw power of the wheel gun? Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the ballistics of the greatest generation, make sure to subscribe. We've got a breakdown coming up next week on the MG42 versus the Browning M1919. You don't want to miss that. Stay safe, keep your powder dry, and I'll see you downrange.